At 4:30 p.m. on March 30th, 2002, Israeli military forces took over Palestinian TV stations when they occupied Ramallah in the West Bank, immediately shutting them down. What followed was a little more unusual. Shortly after occupying the Al-Watan TV station, the Israeli forces began broadcasting pornography over its transmitter. Eventually, the Israelis expanded their cultural offensive against the Palestinian people by broadcasting pornography over two other Palestinian stations, the Amwaj and the Al-Sharak channels. One 52-year-old Palestinian mother of 3 children, according to this report, complained about the deliberate psychological damage caused by these broadcasts. The only Palestinian station not taken over by the Israelis ran a message at the bottom of its screen claiming that anything shown on Al-Watan and other local TV channels has nothing to do with Palestinian programs, but is being broadcast by the Israeli occupation forces. We urge parents to take precautions. Why in the world, asked one woman, would they do such a thing? Today I'd like to answer that lady's question. Why did the Israelis broadcast pornography over Palestinian TV stations? Before I can answer that question, I need to give the official explanation, the official American explanation. According to that explanation, pornography means freedom. This explanation is put forth in The People versus Larry Flint, a big-budget Hollywood movie promoting Hollywood's connection to the pornography industry. This film was produced as part of the pro-pornography propaganda that got produced when Congress was debating the Communications Decency Act in the early 1990s, an act which was supposed to ban obscenity from the internet. So according to the contemporary Hollywood explanation, the Israeli troops began broadcasting pornography over captured Palestinian TV stations because they wanted to spread freedom among the Palestinian people. Somehow that doesn't sound right. The simple fact of the matter is that this incident cannot be explained according to the principles available in contemporary American culture. In order to understand the disparity between the official explanation of pornography and what might be termed its military use, we have to go back to the ancients. The story of Samson and Delilah is a good place to start, except for the fact that the roles are reversed in that story. Israel was invincible militarily, so the Philistines decided that they had to get at the Israelite leader by other than military means. Unable to defeat Samson in battle, the Philistines decided to seduce him sexually. Once Samson succumbed to Delilah's wiles, he lost his power, and Israel lost its leader. They could find him not on the field of battle, but rather, to use Milton's phrase, eyeless in Gaza, grinding at the mill with slaves. Having learned their lesson, the Israelis decided to turn their tables on their opponents because they knew that a blind opponent is no opponent at all, and because they knew, as the ancients on the northern side of the Mediterranean, the Greeks, knew as well that lust makes a man blind. St. Thomas Aquinas gives expression to the same tradition 1,000 years later when he says, lust darkens the mind. A man without a mind is not a formidable opponent. Therefore, lust can be used as a weapon to render an opponent blind or irrational and therefore incapable of mounting a coherent counterattack. At this point, we are beginning to see the outline of why the Israelis were interested in broadcasting pornography. It wasn't because they were interested in promoting freedom. It was because they were interested in promoting freedom's opposite, namely bondage or slavery, because slaves, especially people who are the slaves of their own passions, do not make good fighters. The ancients' explanation of how sexual passion could be put to military use is not all that different than a report issued by the Palestinians 3 months before this incident happened. On January 12, 2002, the Islamic Association for Palestine news agency ran an article claiming that representatives of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Israeli Shin Bet, the experts there have recommended that the relatively conservative Palestinian society be flooded with pornography, drugs, and gambling in order to keep Palestinian youths away from joining the resistance against Israeli occupation and apartheid. The idea, according to this report, first came from the Israeli side, who suggested that only these things could take Palestinian youths away from their hostile fixation on Israel. Apparently, Israel tried broadcasting pornography from at least one television station in the southern West Bank, but had to pull back from its cultural offensive because of protests from Jewish settlers in the area, who felt that pornography materials on local screens could have a detrimental effect on the settler population. 700 years after Samson was blinded by the Philistines, at around the same time of Alaric's sack of Rome, when the empire tottered on the verge of collapse and Christians were being blamed, St. Augustine took the insights of Plato and combined them with those of the Hebrew scriptures to come up with a new formulation of the relationship between slavery and freedom. Unlike Aristotle, who argued that men were slaves phusei, which is to say by nature, Augustine took a radically moral view of the issue. Man was free as long as he acted according to the dictates of practical reason. It is clear, St. Augustine wrote in The City of God, that sin is the primary cause of servitude. That means, St. Augustine continued in another passage from the same book, that a good man, though a slave, is free, but a wicked man, though a king, is a slave.
Obviously, we like to see a regime change, at least I would, in Iran, just as I would like to see in Iraq. The question now is a practical question. What is the best place to proceed? It's not a question of whether Iraq's regime should be taken out, but when should it be taken out? It's not a question of whether you'd like to see a regime change in Iran, but how to achieve it. Iran has something that Iraq doesn't have. Iran has, for example, 250,000 satellite dishes. It has internet use. I once said to the heads of the CIA when I was prime minister that if you want to advance regime change in Iran, you don't have to go through the CIA cloak and dagger stuff. What you want to do is take very large, very strong transponders and just beam Melrose Place and Beverly Hills 2050 and all that into Tehran and into Iran, because that is subversive stuff. They watch it, the young kids watch it, the young people, they want to have the same nice clothes at the same houses and swimming pools and so on. And that is something that is available in internal forces of dissension that are available in Iran, which is paradoxically probably the most open society in that part of the world. It is a lot more open than Iraq, which is probably the most closed society on earth. And therefore you have no ability to foment this kind of dynamic inside Iraq. So the question now is, choose. You can beam Melrose Place, but it may take a long time. On the other hand, if you take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone. There is a new age, something new is happening.
And that is speculation.
Are these isolated protests, or do you believe this could be the beginning of a revolution?
I don't think they're isolated protests. And, you know, what's striking, at least to me and to our analysts here, is the sweep of those protests right now. And these are incredibly brave people and many incredibly brave young women. They're fed up in a lot of ways. And they're willing to take the risk of getting out and demonstrating because they're fed up with economic decay, with corruption, with the social restrictions, especially that Iranian women face, and with political repression as well. Now, again, this is an autocratic system, the Iranian regime, which is very good at repressing people. And, you know, they're quite ruthless now in putting down those kind of protests as well.
Iran has shut down internet access for most of its 80 million people. Elon Musk's Starlink satellite is available in Iran. Will the U.S. government help get terminals into Iran?
Well, the U.S. government has made very clear our support for the free flow of information and freedom of the internet. So without going into any details, I mean, I think, you know, the United States is very committed to that.
So we would get involved this time?
All I can say is, you know, we are going to continue to be strongly supportive as a government in the free flow of information.
Machines are already an advanced prosthetic device, but, you know, McLuhan very presciently realized we are entirely shaped by our media. Well, this is a media so permeating, so inclusive of what we are, that its agenda, in a sense, supervenes the agenda of organic evolution and organic biology. We have been in this situation for a while. I mean, virtual reality is nothing new. What's new is that we now do it with light rather than stucco, glass, steel, and baked clay. But ever since we crowded into cities, we have been involved in a deeper and deeper relationship to our mental children, to our mental offspring, and to an empowering of the imagination. So just in closing, I would say I think that the great lantern that we must lift to light the road ahead of us into a perfect, seamless fusion with the expression of the product of our own imagination is the AI. It is a part of ourselves. It may become the dominant part of ourselves, and it will reshape our politics, our psychology, our relationships to each other and the earth far more than any factor ever has since the inception and establishment of language. This is the weirdest of all guests who now stands pass in hand at the door of the party of human emergence and progress at the millennium.
Like the automobile, the machines that we build and ourselves are in codependence and co-evolution. The function of the World Wide Web is to unite our independent spirits and intelligences in a universal mind of the world, which has a higher intelligence than our present social order. That's the possibility of the cyborg, of the human and the machine in essential partnership.
But you're assuming that the conscious mind is actually in control of the process. In fact, the World Wide Web is growing under the influence of many, many processes and dynamics, none of which are conscious to any individual. It goes where money goes. It goes where expertise goes. It is connected through informational association.
And Barbie. And I'm very keen on sort of the under-the-table effects of these things. In other words, I'm a full-going, full, hard-charging McLuhanist. And I really believe that the strengths and weaknesses of the world we've inherited are strengths and weaknesses put there by print and by the spectrum of effects which McLuhan called the Gutenberg galaxy, the spectrum of effects spun off from print. And if you're not used to thinking in McLuhanist terms, it may not seem immediately obvious to you that phenomenon as different as the modern notion of the democratic citizen, the modern notion of interchangeable parts on an assembly line, the modern notion of conformity to canons of advertising. These are all spectrums of effect created by the linearity and the uniformity of print. It actually, in the late 15th century, reconstructed the medieval psyche into its proto-modern form. And we have lived within that print-constellated cultural hallucination for about 500 years, until the advent of various forms of electronic media in the 20th century. McLuhan talked about radio, he talked about television. He didn't really live to see the internet. One of the best kept secrets of the birth of modern science is that it was founded by an angel. That the young René Descartes was whoring and soldiering his way across Europe as a 21-year-old in a Habsburg army, and one night in the town of Ulm in southern Germany, he had a dream. Strange that this would be the birthplace of Albert Einstein some 200 years later. But Descartes had a dream, and an angel appeared to him in the dream, and the angel said, "The conquest of nature is achieved through measurement and number." And he said, "I got it, modern science, I'll go do it." And he did. And that was the method for over 250 years of the conquest of nature. And it leads us, to the Josephson Junction, the Mars Global Surveyor, long base interferometry that searches nearby stars for Earth-like planets. It brings us the entire cornucopia of scientific effects, but an angelic revelation disguised as a logical philosophical breakthrough. This is what you're not told in the academy. So my point there is, human progress has always depended on the whispering of alien minds, confrontations with the other, probes into dimensions where imagination and chance held the winning hands. So the shaman, as a paradigmatic figure, is applicable both in the Aboriginal social context and in the present social context. The Skywalker, the one who goes between, the one who passes outside of the tribe and then returns with means, insights, cures, designs, glossolalia, technologies, and re-fertilizes the human family by this means. It's irrational, but it's how it actually happens, and it's how it's always happened, and it may very well be the only way that it can happen. This cultivation of the irrational, this flirtation with the breakdown of boundaries. So now, in our nuts and bolts technological progress, we have somehow created technologies which are very friendly to our social values, in that these technologies can be bought, sold, licensed, upgraded, all things which we understand. But these technologies are acting on us in the same way that psychedelic drugs do, but more profoundly, more generally, and more insidiously, because their effect is not understood, or if it is understood, it's not discussed. And so in a way we have come into a kind of post-cultural phase. All culture is dissolving in the face of the drug-like nature of the future.